I'd like everyone to say hello to Scott Suzel. He is working at a partner of ours, A-List Education, and he and his colleague, Dory Schultz, are leading our curriculum development efforts. And we've made a conscious decision to build out our own curriculum so that we can make sure that we're kind of organizing it and threading that needle that we were just talking about with Patrick, threading this needle of how do I create a curriculum that accomplishes our benefit corporation mission while also being aligned with the standards that we need to align to and that we seek to align to, and making sure that we are structuring that work so that we can scale, not just in the US, but around the world. I'm also excited to share with everyone that as I've gotten to know Scott, I keep on finding that it's kind of like this little treasure box of insights. The other day, I just mentioned offhandedly to Scott, like, I'm really interested in flipped classrooms, and I think that there's some things that we can do here. And he just lit up. And it turns out he has a fair degree of expertise in some of the most modern learning techniques that are out there. So we are really excited to have Scott here. We're really thankful for our relationship with A-List. And Scott, take it away.
Thanks, Luke. That was an awesome introduction. I'm flattered. So just to give you a little bit of, and Luke went into it to some extent, but I'll give you a little bit of my background. I was one of those people who was a bit of a lost soul, I guess, trying to find my way in terms of like what I wanted to do. I think I switched my major like 6 times when I was in my undergrad, and like I ended up majoring in consumer psychology and statistics in undergrad, and graduated knowing I didn't want to be in marketing necessarily. And I eventually sort of decided what a lot of people who don't know what they're going to do out of undergrad decide to do, and I went to law school, which, after about 1.5 years, 2 years, I realized pretty quickly I didn't want to be an attorney either. But one thing I did learn when I was in law school and getting ready to go into law school is that when I was studying for the LSAT, and coming from a background where I learned marketing, like a lot of the truths about learning the LSAT kind of came to the fore, which is really understanding the relationships that exist between evidence and deduction, and being able to recognize a fallacy when you see one, and sort of armor yourself against manipulation and propaganda. And I loved all of that stuff. And what I loved even more than learning it was teaching it. And so I actually, before I went into law school, I began teaching all the time, for both for myself and then eventually for some of the larger organizations out there that are for-profit test prep companies. And we'll get into that in a second, actually, a little bit more discussion about what that means to be for-profit and what other kind of wings or sort of options to kind of give back. Yeah, I loved teaching the LSAT. It was my first test that I really started to teach. But I quickly sort of cross-trained into both the GMAT and the GRE, and I started teaching pre-college as well, SAT and ACT. And I really fell in love with the science of learning and trying new things and trying to figure out the best ways to really get. I mean, what's teaching all about is you're trying to download information into another human being, right? And that's not that easy to do a lot of the time. And there's certainly ways to do it more efficiently than others, and sort of experimenting with those different approaches, all the while being completely aware that there are many different types of learners out there as well. And so trying to take all those things into consideration to just yield the best results you possibly can. And, in the meantime, I just had a blast in the classroom. I mean, it was just so much fun to teach, especially in the world of test prep, because I wasn't there to pass judgment on anybody in my classroom. I'm not there to give you a grade. I'm not responsible for that. I'm here to help you gain the skills that you need to get a better result on test day, to get a better score. And so the kinds of relationships I got to develop with my students was a lot different than I think a lot of academic relationships were. As I sort of grew in the company and both started to teach a lot of different tests, I started doing curriculum development as well. Specifically for test preparation. And I eventually found my way over to A-List. Now, something that both A-List does and the previous organizations that I used to work with, and Patrick, to your point, kind of speaking about like, like, look, there's a social good here, and what's the best way to implement that without seeming like, you are, you're simply being profit driven. Both A-List and this, it takes an organization of a certain size in order to do this, but both A-List and really the other companies I've worked for in the past that are for-profit education companies, they don't have a nonprofit wing. They have a for very, very, very little profit or no profit wing, which still operates under the auspices of the large organization. But the goals are entirely different. So what we ended up doing and what we do at A-List a lot is work with work with institutions themselves directly. Oh, let me get Karen in. We work with institutions themselves directly. We also work with based on for grants and other things like that really are sort of focused on providing an equitable playing field, or at least getting the right kind of preparation in front of people who otherwise wouldn't have access to it. And that's a really a big part of the goal and the vision is to, like, we understand that standardized testing and access to preparation and all that is and equity are all substantial issues, and so it's really it's in our best interest, but it's in everyone's best interest to make sure that we do what we can with some branch that really doesn't, it's not profit driven at all. It's not even about that. We would run run it neutral, some programs neutral or some even in the red. That's not important. Overall, we have to be solvent, but that branch is entirely dedicated to getting resources into the hands of people who wouldn't have it. And so I've been doing that for the last 5 years, and recently with A-List, that's really my sole role and motivation is managing those sort of institutional partnerships. But I continue to do curriculum development, and I had the fortune to meet Luke, and I'll be honest, when I first met Luke, I did not know what participatory budgeting really was. I grew up in a really rural town in Ohio, so I didn't even really know what test preparation was for a long period of time in my life, but participatory budgeting wasn't something that I had ever been introduced to. And so it was really, really fascinating to kind of learn about it and sort of learn about the social and democratic aspects of it and how it works. And also on the kind of results that it can yield. One of the things I really loved from the start was Luke's insistence on using things to learn that are real. And the reason that stuck with me is because as through all of my my experience teaching and being in classrooms, I've found the same thing. I mean, you have to, if you can make it real for someone, whether it's real like fiscally or financially, or whether it's real in terms of a result or the thing that you can achieve, creating examples and being able to use real life content whenever possible, it helps people stay engaged, but also it just simply matters more. It always matters more when it's real. And so, yeah. Question? Or Mag? Okay. So without further ado, I kind of want to get into what this process has been like and sort of the difficulties that we've faced, some of the hurdles that we've faced when trying to create curriculum for an idea, around an idea that that is as potentially beneficial as participatory budgeting is when it's done right. So, one moment. All right, and before I get too far into this, I just want to kind of make sure that we kind of if anyone has a question at any point in time, feel free to talk about it. Like, I don't want to necessarily be just kind of speaking to the room the entire time. And we will do questions and answers at the end, of course. If you have questions, you can ask. But more than anything, I would love this to be collaborative, and I would love to have open dialogue about any of these things as they come up. So please ask questions if you have any. So the first thing is just looking at the title slide. It's when creating a curriculum around something like participatory budgeting, you have to find something that is applicable to participatory budgeting, and also at the same time applicable to whatever it is that either already exists or should exist in a student's curriculum academically. So the most natural places where that intersection exists is in financial literature and financial education and civics. And that does make some sense when you think about the name itself, participatory budgeting. Although there is a ton of overlap between both of these things, the participatory aspect happens to be very much civics related, and the budgeting aspect, is very, very much financial literature related. So what our team looks like, we have kind of 3 people working on curriculum, Dory and I are representing A-List, and we have an intern as well who's helping us out with the development itself. We wanted to walk you through this. The assets that we are going to provide for an institution or a school to be able to kind of pass this on to their students. And I want to be clear about this. This curriculum is made for students themselves, but really more so made for instructors. It's a teaching the teacher scenario where you're giving someone basically either a financial literature course or a civics course in a box, and it's ready to go and ready to be implemented. And there are they're project-based assignments, and everything always relates back to everything always relates back to the process of participatory budgeting. So the assets that a person would need in order to deliver that, you need someplace for all the students to go and see a structure of what they're expected to do and a syllabus. And so the website page itself, or the landing page, contains basically the lesson plan itself. Everything else, everything is sort of included there, and you can see what you have to expect and what's on the agenda. The other piece of it is, whenever you're trying to design a curriculum, you really want to start with core principles. They're like your North Star as you are creating curriculum for the modules. And you never want to stray from them. If you have a principle in place, it has to apply to every single lesson, whereas other things that maybe aren't principles are addressed in one lesson or another, but aren't necessarily universally there. So we started out with principles and always made sure that we built around those things. And then, of course, the lesson plans themselves, which go to the people who are going to be instructing the class. And so basically giving the trick was, it's a fine line between presenting people or providing people with so much stuff that it ends up feeling pretty dry. Like the actual interaction and experience with students can feel pretty dry in that sense. And not giving them enough guidance so that there's no real structure in place. And so you're sort of walking a tightrope and trying to find that sweet spot where the teachers have enough space to really utilize the talent that they have, and be themselves in the classroom, which being yourself in a classroom and speaking with your own voice is one of the most important things in terms of creating an engaging experience for students. So we don't want to take any of that stuff away, but we also want to make sure we provide enough that the product is delivered with consistency, no matter who ends up using it. So you take a quick look at what the website page looks like. You can see it there on the computer. It works on both the computer and on cell phones. And to zoom in, this is kind of what it would look like. Now, this is a part of it. Well, actually, I'm sorry. These are 4 stages of participatory budgeting broken out. So what we tried to do when we were thinking about certain topics that we wanted to discuss, we had to think about how it related to participatory budgeting and which bucket it would fall underneath. And as we generated lesson plans, we needed to try to fill it out to make sure that it was a complete, cohesive experience. And we have, for planning, for example, you apply communication strategies when discussing financial issues, down to develop a plan for spending and saving. All of these things are, they're related to financial literature, certainly, but they would also show up in the planning phase of participatory budgeting. So it's a natural way to sort of build that into the curriculum. And again, one of the great things about participatory budgeting is that it walks you through so many steps in the process that sort of just naturally exists out in the world of finance and financial literacy, and financial responsibility, right? So we have all of these different steps in the process, and the students, through the participatory budgeting process, get to link all of these things together instead of just having things taught to them that are sort of siloed, so highly siloed that you fail to see the connection sometimes. I mean, I certainly felt that. I had that experience when I was in school, and certainly even in college. The classes and the workload is very specific, and you don't always see the transition from one element of something to another, and it's hard to see the system from afar. You're sort of always stuck in the forest, and you can't see the whole thing at one time and how the system works together. So this is one of the great things about this. There's a natural flow in participatory budgeting, and when you take part in the process of it, it's much easier to remember all of these other things that sometimes can be fairly dry, or students may just have a difficult time understanding its connection to their own lives. So the planning phase, and then next the ideation phase, and then moving on to refinement and voting and implementation. Those are the 4 stages of participatory budgeting. Both financial literature and civics have, they have topics that intersect with those 4 stages. And so a big part of our job is just trying to isolate those things and figure out what they are and how to expound on them and the best way to sort of get that message across. And so that was the project. So the curriculum principles themselves, and we started we started off talking about how that's sort of just the guiding light here, the North Star, if you will. And here are the ones that we had in place with a ton of Luke's input on the best way to create curriculum that at its core always does a number of things, and this is what they are. So one big thing is we wanted to promote intrinsic motivation, and participatory budgeting, again, that's one of Luke's big things, is like it should be real whenever it's possible. Whenever it's possible, it should be real. And when something is real to someone and they can see the actual outcome take place, and it's not taking place in the hypothetical, that sort of is by itself intrinsically motivating. I mean, so that's the easiest part when it comes to like attaching that to participatory budgeting, is all this stuff is intrinsically motivating because of the fact that you're using real dollars and creating real outcome in the end. Assessment. Every lesson plan will contain an optional reflective exit ticket. So it's always there, and if you would like to employ it, it's something that can be used. But we want to have some element of assessment, not just dictating information, but it's nice to have some sort of ability to assess what was learned at the end. And the other great thing about some sort of exit ticket is that it encourages the students to kind of pull all the things together that they learned and then apply at one time before they leave. And so generally speaking, whenever we're creating something that represented an exit ticket, that was the idea that we had in mind, is like, okay, how do we pull all these things together in a fairly simple project for the students that we can immediately tell, or whoever's administering the class would be able to immediately tell where they are in terms of their understanding of the content. It should be student-centric. Every lesson plan will contain at least one element that's immediately applicable. Now, this is a little trickier than it might sound, because being student-centric when you're doing participatory budgeting stuff with high school students is a lot different than it would be with students who are quite a bit older than that. And I mean, there's a lot of things that high school students, although life is as complicated as it's ever been in general for young people, there are things that high school students haven't experienced yet, just due to their age. And so keeping everything student-centric sometimes created a bit of a hurdle to go over. It's like, well, how far do we really dive into something like, purchasing stocks and investing in a 401k when it's not something that's really in the immediate interest of a student. It's not something that they understand, certainly right now. And honestly, there are probably things that are probably more important to them in the next 3-4 years of their lives as they're getting ready to enter college and finish high school and take on other things. A fourth principle is research shows that economic equality benefits all members of a society regardless of socioeconomic status. So participatory budgeting programs are based on these ideas of diversity and inclusion. I mean, they're giving voice to people that maybe wouldn't otherwise have it. And in that spirit, we want to make sure that it's accessible to people, to anyone at all who might be able to take advantage of this process and participate in something that's so, that's so responsibly and civics oriented. I mean, it's a great thing to take part in, and we would want as many people to have access to it as possible. And so that remains a principle, and that sort of bears itself out in sort of the way that we've constructed some of these lessons. So moving on to the next slide, the lesson plans themselves. So what the lesson plan might look like is this, and this is what it would look like on the website as well. But the lesson plan is broken up into pieces. First, there's a prompt always, and the prompt is always, there to get the students to begin thinking about what they know, and to begin to try to, for the teachers to be able to identify where the gaps need to be filled in. But it gets them started on the right path towards like whatever we're trying to drive home in that particular lesson. Then there's the introduction piece, where we sort of introduce the concept to them. They may watch a short video, they may read an article, depending on the way that the student wants to deliver, or way that the administrator wants to deliver the course. It's not the case that, maybe you're in an environment where watching a video isn't possible. And so in that case, we would want them to have other options, or simply be able to read an article that is still closely tied to the lesson plan. After that, there's some solo work where the students will go or on their own and sort of pull things together. It often, we also need to sort of at this point think about like, okay, so what does this mean for this spot of the participatory budget cycle? Can we incorporate something directly from that process into the lesson plan itself? And where can we best do that? The most fun part of each lesson plan is generally where the group work shows up. Group work allows the students to go ahead and take what they've learned in the lesson so far. And again, these lessons aren't super long. You're talking about 45 minutes or so. So it gives them a chance to take what they've learned and come together and collaborate on something that is, hopefully engaging enough to keep their attention. And also it helps like tie together all the things that they picked up to that point. And then what's not listed here, just because it got cut off, of course, is the very last step, which is go ahead and do one more thing before you leave, or complete this one task in the exit ticket, the evaluative piece of it. So we have got a lot of curriculum to get through. Both for civics and financial literacy, we still have a long way to go. We're knocking out lessons as quickly as we can, but this is sort of how the planning phase looks, right? So for each piece of the participatory budgeting process, step 1, step 2, like planning, ideation, we break it up into the number of lessons that are applicable. And then we always keep these things in mind: knowledge, skill, and disposition. What knowledge do they need to have, what skills, and what is the appropriate disposition given the current state of affairs. And all those things, have to be considered as we're building out content. One of the things that came up pretty early on is, as we are working through these different modules and creating curriculum, there is a ton of vocabulary involved, and students may not have sort of been ever exposed to it. And we want to be able to like have all that stuff in one place. And so for every single lesson, we have a glossary of terms, and those are at times, I think, probably just as helpful for the people administering the classes as the students themselves. Every single course comes along with some, not an overwhelming number, but some number of vocabulary words that we want to make sure the students hold on to as they leave that particular module. Before I get into sort of this one more example of what a lesson might look like, does anyone have any questions for me as we're sort of talking about this this process and what curriculum built around the participatory budgeting cycle might look like?
I'm going to have a question for Patrick. Patrick, this is Luke. It seems to me that we should be able to incorporate Participedia content directly into some of our lesson plans. I'm sure that would be okay, but I just thought like I'm seeing a link that I may not have seen before.
Oh yeah, sure. If you can find the right material, and of course it's open access, anybody could use it, and that's just finding the right ones that you want.
Yeah, and it may be more applicable in our civics side of the curriculum than some of the financial literacy stuff, but I think we're gonna add that to our little list of review stuff. But I just wanted to call that out, that I'm really excited about that that resource.
Good. No, yeah, and let's stay in touch about that.
Okay.
That's good.
Awesome. So this is what a potential lesson could look like. We've got, you know, this is something that is relevant to a lot of kids or teenagers. I think my first job was a really bad job, actually. I was responsible for, I was responsible for, after all the students left the dormitories at Wright State University in Ohio, after they all moved out for the summer, I worked on the cleaning crew that went through and cleaned. That was my very first job I ever had. Yeah, minimum wage and cleaning college students' dorm rooms. But I do remember getting my paycheck and being shocked at how much the government took from me. And so understanding a paycheck is one of those things that's extremely relevant in a young person's life. And when they see the very first pay stub, it's pretty confusing. Like, who is this FICO guy and why does he want my money? So it's nice to have like some sort of introduction to these things at some point. And just be on a really basic level, just like explain what all these things are and where it's going. So, you know, understanding a paycheck, here's all the different pieces of it. Like, and we can talk not just about like what these are, but why they're important. And so, you know, obviously, we talk about how we're creating financial literacy curriculum and civics curriculum. And this is one of those areas, and there's quite a few of them, where those two worlds have a ton of overlap. The financial aspect of understanding your paycheck is, well, what does that mean for you? What does it mean for you to have this much money that's going to be apportioned or taken out? Like, do you have any deductions? You know, what does it mean to pay for health insurance? How much more costly is it going to be if something happens? What's your deductible for your health insurance plan if you have one? All of these things are sort of real world FinLit issues. But then on the other side of it, like, what happens to all of this money that the government is taking? It's, you know, in a sense, and Luke sort of, you know, again, brought this to my attention. I never really thought about it this way, but just taxes themselves are in a way sort of part of the participatory budgeting process. You know, on the other side of it, understanding where this money goes and what that means for, you know, for your quality of life and just really for the quality of life of everyone involved in the system is sort of, you know, where that would go in the civics direction. So it's really interesting to sort of think about some of these things as like two sides of the same coin, really. You have the FinLit aspect and the civics aspect, and they are sort of connected through the process of this like grand experiment of living together in a society. So anyway, that's the sort of like what a potential lesson could look like, and again, how it might apply to those two pieces. So I talked about a little bit about why civics and financial literacy specifically, and how participatory budgeting itself lends itself, you know, pretty closely to those two things. It is tricky though. It's also it's tricky in that we've got I mean, these are gigantic topics, both civics and Finlit. I mean, there's no way we're going to cover comprehensively both all of civics and all of Finlit in a participatory budgeting course. And so what we want to do is be able to be able to sort of cherry pick the things that we feel are the most important and the most relevant. And so there's a lot of different aspects of the application of these things that are coming into play. And when you sort of balance all of those things and figure out how to tell a story over the course of the participatory budgeting process, a story that makes sense. And so really that was the big challenge here is being able to kind of, pull all that stuff together in a way that makes sense and also is exciting for students. And so, some of the considerations that we had to contend with is is this something that's accessible? Like at a certain point, it became apparent that it was really important for us to have an option where students could watch a video, and then also an option where they would just simply read an article, because it's not possible for everyone necessarily to, hop on Wi-Fi and watch a video all the time. The relationship to the participatory budgeting process itself. There are certain things that we really, really wanted to discuss, but really difficult to make the case that it would be a seamless piece of the participatory budgeting process. It would kind of feel like it was out on an island, although maybe incredibly important for something like civics or Finlit. It has to relate. The intrinsic interest piece. So again, the participatory budgeting process on its own is sort of already intrinsically interesting. But it's also kind of on the people guiding this entire project to make sure that they have the tools necessary to keep the students engaged in the process. Because once you sort of fall out of that loop, then it's pretty easy to kind of forget about what the end goal is, or feel just so removed from it that it no longer moves you. And if you're not moved, you're not intrinsically interested. And that's one of the core philosophies really was like, again, to keep people engaged. Speaking of engagement, within, although the PB cycle itself is intrinsically interesting, within each module, within each syllabus, we also wanted to create situations that were as engaging as possible. Now, again, you're walking a tightrope between what is considered engaging, and what is considered relevant. Sometimes the most relevant things aren't that engaging, and the most engaging things, have a kind of a loose connection to the content. So, you got to do what you can to try to bring those two things together and find that sweet spot where you're just always kind of threading the needle. So there was a lot to consider here with this project overall, but we are making great progress, and at this point we've got the vast majority. Let me stop the share real quick. We've got the vast majority of the Finlit curriculum built out, and we're ready to tackle the civics portion next. And it's been a lot of fun. It's also, one of those things I always I tell my students at the very end of a course is to go ahead and teach the material to a friend. The best way to learn something is to teach it. And I kind of feel that way when I was putting this curriculum together. I mean, I learned so much, and not just, about concepts I'd never heard about, or definitions I was unfamiliar with, and things that I just had to learn along the way that required rote memorization. That's not even what I mean. What I mean is I learned a lot about how these disparate topics all connect to each other, and a great deal of that is owed to the fact that this is all married to the participatory budgeting process, which is again, it's so inherently systematic and flows from one piece to the next. And so it was really a different way for me to understand these two topics, both financial literacy and civics, and it was a really I was honored to be able to be asked to do it, and it's been a lot of fun. So. Any questions, guys?
Well, I'm pausing for a sec.
Yeah.
I might, I want to make sure that we give the floor to other people, but, for sure, Patrick, you can start to see the design principles. We're further along in our financial literacy curriculum, and we're pretty much just starting the civics side, but you can start to see the deeper design principles that are informing the work, and how we believe that our app and the participatory budgeting process stands alone. You don't need the curriculum to do the participatory budgeting or use the app. However, if you want to create the educational outcomes and the standards align structure, well, then you're going to use our curriculum, and the curriculum is going to expect that you're doing this. So we can actually integrate quite literally assignments about civics, which we saw. I don't think you were here for Elizabeth Dudley's presentation from the Academy of American Studies, but she actually was the one who really clued us into this process, where her homework assignments for her students were, you have to go look at 3 other proposals from other students. And I'm going to track you in a positive way, meaning we started to develop, Clint started, and the dev team started to develop actual performance reporting for Elizabeth, so that
Participation.
participation, so she could actually see the students participate, and she could actually see that they were making comments, not just, my teacher told me I had to make a comment, so I logged in and typed in XYZ, right, or comment or whatever. There was actual thoughtful engagement there, and I thought that was really interesting, and it opened up our eyes about what's possible with a learning by doing platform that matters to the students, and also gives them an opportunity to engage in other things. And so curiously, as we go into raising capital to realize our dreams, there's ed tech investors who don't understand that, because what they want is AI to replace the teacher. And they're like, how come you're not using AI to replace teachers? And we're like, because that's not what we believe.
Right. Yeah. No, that's great the way you're linking that in. That's just, you're already doing exactly what I was suggesting, and I was nowhere near the level of sophistication that you are in terms of how you're doing that. I think I wish we had. It's harder and higher. I'm finding that it's more difficult when you get into higher education, because university professors are much less apt to take up a preset curriculum.
Right.
So we've got some people that the best we can get them to do is share what they've got for their own class. But we are going to try to do that, because we're going to try to develop a MOOC, for example, so and international principles. So,
Patrick, to that point, like when you have good people delivering content, it's really in everyone's best interest to just allow them to be their engaging selves and not dictate too much. And so that we have to sort of find that space where we're providing tools that someone needs to create an amazing environment without having a bunch of checklists and bullet points and everything that people have to hit, which just generally just makes for a dry experience, whether it's at the higher education level or high school age, really. So yeah, we're trying to be as helpful and supportive as we possibly can without dictating.
Give them room to do what they want to do. Yeah. Good job.
Well, yeah. Scott, you might be the one presenter that gets it done on time, shading all the rest of us with your clarity and brevity.
Is that what it was? I honestly, I thought that was going to run longer. I was trying to plan for that, but you just never know. I think I talk a little faster generally when I'm in front of a group.
No, I thought it was fantastic. Team, I know we're in various, both T and, so for the team, I know we're in various TEA and lunch breaks and coffee breaks. Our next presenter is at the top of the hour. Scott, thank you so much.